Hey there folks, welcome back to another episode of Building a World One Step at a Time on Hedron. And today, we're going to be looking at macros, one of the most fundamental building blocks of how you do things or create things within the site. Let's get into it. So macros fundamentally come in two forms, either universal or specific. The way you build them, however, and the things they do are the same. The difference is for universal macros that they are literally used by everyone, so think something like the dash action in D&D 5e or anything along those lines. An ability or a setting or something that is available to or applies to every single character. Whereas a specific macro might be being able to cast Eldritch Blast, or being able to fly, or something along those lines. The way you build them is very simple, so I will simply use the universal macro screen in order to show you what they are like. So when adding a universal macro, when you have a macro, you see the first step is you can name it whatever you like. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave that for now and name it something like Test 1, which is fine. Allowed entity types, you can actually specify it to different individual things if you want it to, where it's like, this is a class that's available to everyone, it is a spell that's available to everyone, or what have you. If you are making a macro within a specific menu already, this step is taken care of, so this is specific to if you are making a universal macro. You can also do it as a campaign level thing if you have a specific ability you want to give someone on a universal level for a campaign you're using. Say you're playing a 5e scenario in which you are giving people the ability to use a mech suit, and there is a giant mech laser beam you want to give them access to, you can actually make it a campaign level field. From here, there's a few different things you can do. What type of entity is it? Is it an active or a passive? An active one would be jumping, would be attacking, anything along those lines. Passive, however, is something that is consistent throughout time. Do you get a buff to your armor? Do you get a buff to your health? Do you have a certain natural basic amount of health you want everyone to have? That would be a passive one. This is for the primary level, and for the trigger, you can in fact set it that it's a passive effect or a user-triggered effect. Generally, these will line up, though there will be some very, very, very rare corner cases where they don't. But in general, a user-triggered ability will be an activation situation, whereas a passive effect will be a passive situation. You can take the time to set things such as activation time, such as which you would set elsewise in the campaign, so it may be 1 minute, 1 round, anything along those lines. At base, it simply targets the source, i.e. the user of the macro, but you could add in target enemy, you could add in target ally, you could add in any target, and you can also change the number to whom it applies so that when you're using it, it can affect all these different things. You can give it a limited duration, such as 1 turn, 1 round, or anything along those lines, and of course, you can set usages per rest or anything along those lines. Once per round, once per day, anything along those lines. From there comes the actual steps of what the macro does. And this is going to be where this splits into a multi-part situation because macros can do multiple things. But at a base level, a macro either affects the source or the target or anything along those lines, and then you have to pick the type of steps, of which there are currently 8 possibilities. You can apply an effect, compute a number, stop the macro based on a condition, trigger another macro, grant an item, prompt a choice, alter a macro, or expand a casting list. Some of these are simpler, some of these require a bit more explanation, so in this next episode following this one, I am going to break down what each one of these does, how they can be used, as well as how they can all be used together to create complex and full far-reaching abilities, as well as some examples of what that may look like. So stay tuned for the next one. What's going on, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Building a World One Step at a Time. Last episode, we talked about the basics of macros. Today, we are getting into the specifics of macros and how to build a macro. So jump in and let me show you how that works. So you need to have an idea of what it is you plan to do when building a macro, obviously. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to show you building an attack action and some of the steps that may be taken along the way in order to get there, as well as explain the remaining steps you might use for different reasons. So The first step is going to be, of course, attack roll, because we want to roll and see if we are going to be successful. So the source is the one rolling, and we're going to go ahead and compute number. And in this case, rather than queuing it off any of our stats, let's just say it is a flat d20. In this case, we are going to type 1d20. And as it checks to make sure it's valid, we get the check mark. We know that's good. So this first step is going to add a d20 roll as the first thing it does. The next step, we're going to need to check and see if, let's just say the way your system works is on an 11 or higher, you succeed, on a 10 or lower, you fail. In this case, we are going to do check for success. And we're going to make the step type stop macro based on condition. What this step does, so the compute number step obviously computes a number. At base, it's going to give you a very basic computation, 1d20. 1d20 plus 3, 2d8 plus 7. But you can get more advanced. You could do 2d10 plus strength modifier. You could do 1d8 minus constitution. You can add any number of things. You can even add multiplication and division. Further, if you break out into the more specifics, you can add dice modifiers when doing number computations, including things like keeping highest, keeping lowest, exploding, and the like. So if your dice explode when you're running your system, this would be where you set that. You would set the dice type, you would set modifiers. You could type here and include stats that would be included in the computation, and so on. Stop macros are exactly what they sound like. You stop the macro at this step unless you fulfill a condition. So in this case, as we said, we want to make sure that this 1d20 is an 11 or more. So the condition is that we add the condition and we say for the step attack roll, we will look attack roll and you will see test one step attack roll. The result needs to be greater than or equal to 11. And so now it will check and make sure that the result of this step is 11 or more. If it is 10 or less, it will not continue back this step. It will stop the macro based on the condition. However, if it's 11 or more, it will continue. And now we'll add the step, and let's just say we're going to apply 1 point of damage automatically. Apply damage. That your system just has 1 point of damage if you succeed, otherwise it's nothing. In this case, we will apply an effect, and we are going to go ahead and add damage. And it's going to be 1 point of damage. The damage type is going to be slash damage because they happen to be using a sword, calculate based on the target in this case, and of course we will be going with, I have not set hit points in this, but when you set hit points as a stat, it will be health, it will be hit points, it will be life, it will be whatever you're specifically doing, and you will look for the current value on that stat, at which point you would save, and this would apply the damage to them, and that would be the full macro. By clicking on the player end when in the VTT, they will purely see the test one macro. When they click to use it, it will roll a d20. It will then check to make sure it's an 11 or above. If it's a 10 or below, it will stop it right there, showing them the result and nothing else. If it's an 11 or above, it will, on target enemy, deal 1 damage. And that's how you build a macro. What do the other effects do? Well, apply effects can, in addition to applying damage, it can also apply status effects. It can add bonuses. So you would click add bonus and add their stats. So let's just say we wanted to add to their, I remember Psyche was one of the particular stats. You could add a bonus of 1 point to Psyche, for instance. From there, you can also add things like dice roll effects, such as you want to make it so that the next die they roll, they add a 1 to the sum of it. You can add that. These are all things. Applied effects are done through apply effects. Simple enough. Compute number, I've already shown you. Stop macro, I've already shown you. Trigger a macro will be to re-trigger a macro in the step process if you need to. Granting an item is exactly what it sounds like. You can literally pick an item out of any item that you've created as an entity in your game and add it to someone's inventory. And literally it would just be that you would click add item. Obviously I don't have any here, but you would click it. You could have them add one. You could also have them remove one. Adding -1 items would remove one. So this would be what you would use if you needed to use something. Say your system has firearms and you need to expend ammo. You would have it grant an item and you would have it add -1 to their ammo count in order to spend that ammo for the shot. Prompt to choice gives them the ability to make a decision. Maybe you have to ask them if they want to choose option A or option B. It could also be something like, did this succeed? In case there is a more esoteric stat, or it is purely a one-sided roll, and you need to know from the GM whether or not the roll succeeds in order to keep going. And in this case, you could ask, did this succeed? And the options will be yes, comma, no. From there, you could then do another stop macro and have it check this step to make sure it equals yes or equals no, and just make sure your capitalization is the same, and that's how you could have that be a gateway for further things. Alter a macro means you can take a step and change anything, and expand casting list is exactly what it sounds like. This would be if you need to have an ability give you access to casting new spells. Maybe your character has a transformation move in which they power up and they gain further abilities. You can give them a casting list of abilities or spells, and you can have them expand their casting list through the transformation. These are all just some very high-level overviews, but this would be how you build out all the various attacks, spells, buffs, anything else that you may need to do when working on Hedron, and from there it's purely a matter of, is it going to be a universal macro that everyone has access to, or is it going to be specific to certain characters, classes, or otherwise? And that is how you build a macro when you're building a world here on Hedron. Hey there folks, and welcome back to Building a World one step at a time here on Hedron. And today we're going to get into meta-currencies. Things that are utilized and spent, but not necessarily in the way of simple gold or experience. Let's jump in. Meta-currencies are honestly a very simple tool to work with. Sometimes your games have things that you need to keep track of that can be spent or utilized that are not simple experience. Think of it in the terms of job points or ability points or anything along those lines. Meta-currencies can be used for those. Meta-currencies can be spent on any number of things. Perhaps you have quite literally a special currency along the lines of gold or silver, but that can be exchanged for very, very specific in-game benefits. You could also use it there. And it is quite as simple as adding a meta-currency use and giving it a name. So you might go with ability points as your option. And for there, you can decide, is there a maximum quantity a character can hold on to or no? So in this case, if there is no maximum quantity of ability points and a character can hold on to as many as they want and then eventually trade them in to learn abilities, that would be fine. But maybe you do have a limit. Maybe it can be traded in for something. Maybe something along the lines of heroic inspiration is an option. So from there, heroic inspiration. And you would say the max quality is 1, and you can only have 1 point of heroic inspiration at a time. Now, that gives them the opportunity to have that as the currency. They can gain the currency in whatever manner that you decide. It can be a GM-decided button, it can be through doing a specific action, it can be any number of things, and it will give them that heroic inspiration as a currency, and they can later spend it on whatever action you like. Meta-currencies can be used in thresholds, triggers, or macros, as it states here, so you can actually have a macro spend heroic inspiration to do a thing. For instance, you may do a stop macro check, as explained in the last episode, in order to see if there was a success, and if there was a failure, have them ask the question, would you have it check to see if their heroic inspiration is greater than 0, and if so, have it ask the question, would you like to spend your heroic inspiration? And from there, have it re-trigger the macro to try again. There's any number of things you can use. Meta-currencies are essentially the exact thing you want to use when building out characters, giving them options, giving them abilities, giving them whatever they may have, stat boosts, you name it, that don't necessarily fall in line of simply leveling up and progressing. Hey there folks, we're back with Building a World one step at a time here on Hedron, and today we're getting into spells and status effects, so let's hop in and break it all down. When it comes to magic in Hedron, there's 2 different components that are important, spell schools and casting sources. Again, going off of 5e is the basic idea. Spell schools would be more the categorization of spells, whereas casting sources would be how you utilize them. So a spell school would be something like abjuration, conjuration, evocation, and the like, whereas a casting source would be level 1 spell slots, level 2 spell slots, cantrips, and so on. So, for our system, let's just say we want to have the schools of magic be elementally inclined. We could make fire magic, ice magic, and lightning magic, and have those be the 3 different varieties of magic available to players. From there, the casting sources could be that every character gets the ability to cast basic stuff, gets the ability to cast cool stuff, and gets the ability to cast huge stuff. And from there, you can decide that there's going to be a certain amount of each of them. So they can use basic stuff an unlimited amount, making a little fire in your hands, making a little crackling of electricity between your fingers that almost looks like a spark, and that's it. Whereas cool stuff would be a basic firebolt, or a lightning bolt, or hurling an icicle at someone. And then huge stuff would be a big giant explosion, or creating a storm out in the sky. And they might be able to use basic stuff an unlimited amount of times, but then depending on their class, cool stuff, maybe they can use it twice a day, maybe they can use it 3 times a day. That can then be determined on a class level. Huge stuff just once a day, or maybe they don't even get access. Same thing. Abbreviations would be how it goes in the system. So you might just put basic, cool, and huge, so that when you're making the actual spells themselves, you would simply have to queue them up as basic, or cool, or huge, or anything along those lines. And the size calculation, of course, would be the size of the option, how many slots you get at maximum, things like that, and it uses the ability to do formulas, so you could say maybe they have their intelligence +2 access to cool stuff, whereas you could just give them infinite basic stuff. Or maybe they have exactly 5 uses no matter what. You can kind of make that work however you need to. Similarly, status conditions are also a thing that can happen. Maybe you have the ability to make someone blinded or paralyzed or anything along those lines. You would want to build the actual status effect or status condition into the system. So we can add a status effect and we can call it blinded. And then from there you can add a description of what it does, and you can add automatic effects so that later when you are adding an effect in a macro, this condition can be added and the effect can happen automatically. So maybe blinded would lower your accuracy by 1. So you can have it add a bonus. You can make an accuracy stat. Obviously, I don't have one built into the system yet, but you can make an accuracy stat, choose it from the list, and you can give it a -1 bonus, quote unquote, and that means it would lower their accuracy by 1. And so then you can make an attack that blinds an enemy, and in that added effects or apply effects step that I showed you when building macros, in addition to dealing 1 damage, you can have it add a status effect and have it add blinded, which will now come up on the list of options for status effects. As you can see, all of these things build on one another, so that's why they kind of all had to be explained in a certain flow and order, and you could get an idea of things that are going on. But essentially, as each step builds on, you can see how they all intermingle and connect to make the puzzle all come together. Hey there folks, welcome back to Building a World One Step at a Time here on Hedron. And today I want to get into what I call system flexibility and versatility. This is talking about how you can use things that we've established up to this point along this way in order to create more versatile options for you that may suit your system better, despite not thinking that that is the category that something should be used for. So I'm going to show you some examples of different ways different things can be used. So for starters, I want to show you the variety of how you can use different things to accomplish the same goal depending on what your system needs. So for starters, we're going to look at heritages. Heritages are traditionally what you would refer to as ancestries or races or species or anything along those lines when you are making a system. In 5e, for instance, heritages or ancestries would be dragonborn, dwarf, elf, and the like. These are your characters' backstory, their species, their ancestry. The thing is, if you were to play, say, mazes, also a system available on Hedron, if you were to look at the roles category, which means your character is a fighter, a paragon, a sentinel, or a vanguard, this determines the die they roll when playing in mazes and determines their base health and their star access, which allows them to use special abilities. Roles are also heritages. The idea of a heritage is not necessarily the background of your character. The idea of a heritage is this is an immutable fact that relates to your character that does not change through the progression of levels. A character who is a dwarf will always be a dwarf no matter how many levels they get. Much the same in mazes, a character who is a paragon will always be a paragon no matter how many mazes they successfully make it through. The same idea applies in the opposite end on classes. Classes are things that scale over time, and so therefore can be leveled up. If your system has the ability that, say, if you play an elf, or play a dwarf, or anything along those lines, you can over time gain new elven abilities, well, that actually might weirdly be a case where your ancestry would be the class. So, in the case of this, going again, but with a much older Dungeons & Dragons answer, I'm a bit of an old head when it comes to TTRPGs. I cut my teeth on Dungeons & Dragons Basic, as it's known, which had 7 classes, and of those 7 classes, you had Fighter, Thief, Magic User, Cleric, Elf, Dwarf, and Halfling. Elf, Dwarf, and Halfling were actually classes in that game, and so you would level them up, and you would gain abilities with them. So, essentially, you don't necessarily want to restrict yourself to what Hedron calls these things. You want to use what makes the most sense for your system. Do you gain abilities based on your class as you level? Well, then it's a class. Do you gain abilities based on your heritage as you level? Well, then it's actually a class. When you pick your class, are you done and settled, and that doesn't change? The only thing you maybe gain is health or gain new abilities? Well, maybe your classes are actually heritages. There's all different things that can be used on the site. You have to find the things that work best for you. The same thing applies when you're referring to spells or abilities or feats. Abilities are units of progression and they are gained as you gain levels and the things like that. Abilities might be new attack moves that you learn as your class, what have you. Feats, however, are acquired once and then they remain static, and the way they get acquired can be in different ways. Spells are obviously magic, and so they tie into any sort of spell system. They will often have schools of magic, casting lists. They may have components or costs in order to be used that are universal to their usage and can be categorized thereof. Each of them is somewhat similar, but with important differences that you have to find how they best work for your system, or if they even work for your system. And remember, if they don't, you don't need to keep them in there. You can quite simply turn them off as an option. So it's up to you what you need for your system. Hedron's not about telling you what you need. It's about finding the tools to make it work for you.